Awesome. Come on in, you guys. Yeah, just come stand right on in here. Thanks.
Here, and then we can make lines if we could. All right. All right. Just one more reminder for anybody who just joined the call, please do keep your lines muted. Just lines if we could.
You know your ex friend.
Martha, you're not going to get to hide in the back. Please do keep your lines muted until the end of the press conference. You will have the opportunity to ask questions. Could you guys take one big step forward?
Absolutely. Maybe.
Big step forward. Perfect. All right. And we're going to get started. With that, Attorney General Bob Ferguson.
Thanks, Brianna. And Brianna, we do have a few people on the line as well. Is that right? Good. I'll make sure I ask if there's questions there as well. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I'm joined by a large number of folks from the Office of the Attorney General who do all the work on these cases related to the opioids epidemic that we'll be talking about today. So I'll be thanking them later on, but I want to start with a thank you to them because their work makes these outcomes and these cases possible. So today, we're here to make two announcements related to these efforts on the opioids epidemic. And first, we've now reached a major milestone in this initiative. With the resolution of several cases today that I'll detail shortly, we have now recovered more than $1 billion for treatment and other proven strategies to combat the opioid crisis. Second, our work is not done. While we've resolved some of our investigations and we'll announce the in individual cases and dollar amounts, we're pressing forward with additional lawsuits. So we'll also be announcing a major lawsuit filed here in King County Superior Court against 3 national pharmacies for their role in fueling the opioid epidemic. The lawsuit asserts that these pharmacies failed in their duty to serve as a check against the flood of opioids in our community. The lawsuit names Albertsons, Kroger, and Rite Aid, and chain pharmacies that they acquired, including Safeway, QFC, Fred Meyer, and Bartell Drugs. In addition to this lawsuit, today I'm announcing that I'm resolving our office's investigations into 2 other national pharmacy chains, including CVS and Walgreens. We're also resolving investigations against 2 opioid manufacturers, Allergan and Teva. Combined with our recent announcement last week with Walmart, Washington is receiving an additional $434 million to combat the opioid epidemic. Combined with previous actions, lawsuits that we've had in the past, the legal team has now recovered more than $1.1 billion to fund state and local government efforts to combat the opioid epidemic. Importantly, I really want to underscore this, I'm always asked about this, it's a good question to ask, all these funds must be used to combat the opioid epidemic. That's how the funds must be used. That's how the settlements are structured. That's how it has to be done. To give some examples, so in these resolutions there are some examples of the type of things that these dollars can be used for. To give you some examples, improved and expanded treatment options, addressing the needs of pregnant women and their families, including those with babies with neonatal disorder, youth-focused outreach and prevention efforts, support for first responders, and other evidence-based programs and services that can save lives and preserve families. Here are just a few statistics. Many of you are familiar with these, but I thought I'd share a few statistics on, to say the harm that the epidemic caused doesn't really come close to doing it justice, but the harms that the epidemic has caused. In 2011 alone, 112 million daily doses of prescription opioids were pumped into Washington state. That's enough for a 16-day supply for every man, woman, and child in our state. In 2015, 8 Washington counties had more opioid prescriptions than residents. So that's not pills, more prescriptions than residents in 8 Washington counties. But these human costs are not limited to a decade ago. The ripples continue through the present. Nearly 80% of heroin users report using prescription opioids before beginning heroin use. In 2021, an average of 4 or more Washingtonians died every day from an opioid overdose. Overdose deaths involving synthetic opioids such as fentanyl doubled statewide from 2019 to 2020, then almost doubled again from 2020 to 2021. These grim statistics are precisely why my team and I are continuing to push forward on holding those responsible for their conduct. And we want to make sure they pay for the damage that they caused. So first, let me start by briefly detailing the lawsuit that we're filing today. Again, it's just been filed in King County Superior Court. It names national corporations Albertsons, Kroger, and Rite Aid, who also acquired chain pharmacies that Washingtonians frequent: Safeway, QFC, Fred Meyer, Bartell Drugs. During the opioid crisis over the last decade, these companies ignored federal regulations, put profits over safety, and knowingly oversupplied opioids in our state. Washingtonians trust pharmacies to be responsible. They depend on that for their health. Pharmacies serve an important role as the final barrier to prevent overprescribing controlled substances or any prescription drug. But that is not what happened in many cases. These chain pharmacies illegally, recklessly, and negligently filled opioid orders without adequately investigating red flags of fraud or overprescribing. These national companies had a wealth of data at their fingertips to monitor and dispense these medications and prescriptions in a safe manner, but they failed to give it to their own pharmacists. These companies tied their pharmacists' pay to how fast they filled prescriptions, hindering their pharmacies from doing their job and checking that a prescription was safe for that customer. This led to predictable failures. Let me give you a couple examples. These pharmacies filled opioid prescriptions written by doctors or nurses whose licenses were suspended or revoked, or who federal authorities had indicted. As an example, Bartell Drugs paid a fine to the federal government in 2020 for allegations they filled such prescriptions at least 400 times. In fact, all these companies previously paid penalties for violating federal rules regarding opioid prescriptions. Those fines are not enough to achieve meaningful accountability, not even close. These companies' role in the oversupply of prescription opioids helped to fuel an illegal market that flooded our communities with these highly addictive and dangerous drugs. Communities across Washington state are still dealing with damages caused by these companies, and our lawsuit demands their conduct be called out for what it is: unfair and deceptive business practices that create a public nuisance across our state. We're seeking penalties of $7,500 per violation of the Consumer Protection Act and asking the court to take injunctive actions to prevent future damages. As this case goes forward, we'll be detailing before the judge a precise penalty amount, but obviously, as all these cases involve very, very large sums of money, and we will be alleging many, many thousands of violations of our Consumer Protection Act. Secondly, in addition to filing this lawsuit, we are entering into resolutions with 3 other national pharmacy chains and 2 opioid manufacturers. So just take a step back. We have lots of litigation, lots of investigations going on related to the opioid epidemic. And so first, we're filing this new lawsuit. Number 2, we're announcing the resolution of multiple investigations against some of these companies, settlements from our investigations. So combined with previous outcomes from our trials, from our investigations, and from our cases, the total recoveries now surpass $1.1 billion. The resolutions here against CVS, Walgreens, Teva, and Allergan range from $50 million to $120 million on those resolutions. I think they're detailed in our press release. And last week, we announced a resolution with Walmart, who's paying $62 million. So one technical note, because you've got a bunch of lawyers here and a legal team here, is each of these resolutions that we're announcing needs to be approved by local jurisdictions in Washington state. That's just like our previous resolutions. There's nothing new there, and those local jurisdictions have approved those in the past, and we fully anticipate that to happen. But the deal becomes final once those local jurisdictions sign on. I'm very confident they'll sign on once again, because half of the proceeds from the new $434 million that we're announcing today, half of those dollars go to those local jurisdictions, so they can make decisions on how best to address the opioid epidemic in their communities. So as a result of these legally binding resolutions, I want to add they're writing more than a very large check. So each of these companies also have to change their practices and how they do business. They have a legally binding responsibility now to tightly monitor opioid prescriptions and prevent patients from seeking multiple prescriptions. The $1.1 billion total we've recovered is definitely not a final total, because we're holding other companies accountable. As one example, we have a lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson that's been going on for some time. We expect that case to reach trial next year in 2023. And we look forward to holding Johnson & Johnson accountable in a courtroom here in Washington State on their conduct. So just a final thought, I think what I would say is that our strategy when it comes to these companies has been, number one, to be aggressive. I think it's fair to say there's not a more aggressive state out there across the country in taking these corporations on. Number two, all these cases are huge and complex, which is why you often see national settlements, where basically AGs across the country, local jurisdictions across the country enter into one big global settlement. Sometimes we join those settlements. We're announcing several of those today, where we join with those other AGs on a resolution. Sometimes, however, I believe that we should go our own way in Washington State, file our own lawsuit, like we're doing today, like we did against Johnson & Johnson, like we did against the distributors, where we had a multi-month trial right down the street. And there are risks, of course, in going your own way and taking on those huge corporations. In a court case, they have a lot of resources. But the team has stepped up every time when I've asked them to go our own way and use our own resource in this office to have Washington on its own take on these huge corporations to hold them accountable. So that combination of going our own way and accepting some national settlements has worked well in the cases where we've gone our own way. So think cases like Purdue Pharmaceutical, the Sackler family, the distributors. We've recovered nearly an extra $200 million for Washington State that we would not have recovered had we accepted those national deals. So obviously I can't take every one of these entities to court, right? We don't have the resources for that. Nobody does. But what's important is to pick what we think are the right cases to take to trial and hold these entities responsible, and also accept national deals that we think are good deals that bring in dollars right away for the state of Washington to address the opioid epidemic. So with that, I'm going to stop right there. We'll see if there are a couple questions in the room first, and then I think Brianna said there are a couple folks on the line. We'll see if folks on the line have questions as well. So I mentioned before, I'm joined by a number of folks. In answering questions, I may get some assistance. If it's on the settlement side, Jeff Rupert's here. He leads our office's work on the opioid cases, and then two assistant attorneys general are here on the litigation side with the case that we filed, Susan Lorenz and Martha Rodriguez Lopez. So if they come up to speak to help with questions, I'll have them identify themselves so folks on the phone know who's speaking. Any questions from folks here in the room? Yep. Yep. Yes.
Can you tell us the history with these 5 companies? When did that, for the resolution you've reached, when did that process start?
When did the process, so I'll repeat the question just for folks on the phone. So the question is, for the 5 cases that we are announcing resolutions, when did the investigation start on those? I will definitely have to ask the team. I won't be able to get that right for each one of them. So who wants to handle that? And as best we can, if we don't have the exact dates on those, we can get them back to you. But does anyone happen to know? It looks like Jeff's going to take the first crack, but we can get you detailed information if we don't have it.
Right, it's Jeff Rupert speaking. It was in the 2018-2019 time period when all the opioid investigations started rolling.
So there'd be, and so each of these would be multi-states, right? Lots of states involved. And so if you need more specific detail now, we'd be happy to get that for you. But in the last several years is when the bulk of these cases, the investigation started. Thanks for that question. Anyone on the phone have any questions for us?
Yeah, just
Claire was Seattle Times.
So I heard, I think I heard 2 voices. I think I heard the Seattle Times in there and somebody else. Why don't we have the Seattle Times go first? If I'm right, then we'll take the other question.
Hi, this is Claire from the Times. Thank you for
Hi, Claire.
taking my question. I just wanted to clarify on the lawsuit that you're announcing, the 3 lawsuits you're announcing today. Is it 3 separate lawsuits, or are the 3 chains being sued in the same procedure?
Thanks for that question, Claire. Martha from my team will answer that question. Go right ahead, Martha.
Thank you, Claire. So it is one lawsuit that's being filed against all the entities.
Thank you.
Yes.
And if I may, I want to make sure I understand. Washington is the only state pursuing this lawsuit. Can other states join if they want to, and have any other states indicated that they're interested?
Right now, this lawsuit is in Washington State. No other state is joining this lawsuit. In other jurisdictions, they have chosen to sue different entities. So you will find that in some other jurisdictions, they are suing one or more of these entities. But at present, this is a Washington-focused lawsuit.
Thanks, Martha. And one thing I just will add to that, Claire, is so this is a case right here in King County Superior Court using Washington state law against these entities. So what you'll see across the board on most of these cases or investigations is they're generally resolved with national resolutions that involve all or most of the AGs across the country, right? Speaking from the AG perspective, right? But you do see states occasionally picking specific entities to file complaints on their own using their own state laws to take those entities to court and sometimes reach their own resolutions via settlement. So those are far more infrequent, right, than the states that simply accept the national deals. If you want to sort of break down those later on, we get those for you. But there have been some states that have chosen in certain circumstances to file their own lawsuits. And if you want more detail about any particular state or any particular entity, we'd be happy to get that for you. But in general, the overwhelming majority of the resolutions come through these national settlements. Thanks for that question, Claire. I think I heard another voice was jumping at the same time as Claire.
Yeah, thank you. This is Jerry Cornfield from the Daily Herald. A couple questions related to the resolutions you announced. I think there's 5. Is the process the same for distributing the money of each of those, in which not only is it a 50-50 split, but do the communities need to go through the Opioid Abatement Council and so forth? Is the administration of the funds the same?
So I will have Jeff Rupert just to make sure, because there are multiple resolutions here, as you know, Jerry, so there can be some slight differences on those. And again, we're happy to, if you want to do a follow-up, go into as much detail as you want on that. At a high level for right now, I'll start by saying, yes, it's going to be a 50-50 split with those jurisdictions. Yes, local jurisdictions must sign on, just as they have in the past. I think there are some slight differences maybe in how that works, which I'll turn to Jeff to maybe give an example or two of how that might work. Jeff, go ahead.
Right. To answer your question directly, Jerry, the One Washington Memorandum of Understanding that has the opioid abatement councils, that will govern. So the process for the local governments, once they sign on, will be similar as the distributor deal. What Bob was referring to is that just for us to get a deal, it's a little different than the distributor situation, where it was very Washington focused and we needed 115 local governments to sign on. Here we're going to look nationally about the number that sign on, but we very much expect all 126 local governments in Washington to join. Again, they joined last time, and we're working with them throughout, and have been good partners, and because they get to decide how to use these resources in their communities.
Thanks. And Jeff, no local jurisdictions have lawsuits against these entities, right?
They do have them,
They do have them. So Jerry, just to add to that, so there are some, as I think you know, right? Some local jurisdictions have their own litigation, just as they did in previous resolutions. I'm confident that the jurisdictions here in Washington, the team has really spent a lot of time with those jurisdictions over previous deals, and I'm confident they're going to sign on as they have in the past. But that does need to happen.
Okay. So if I could just a couple related follow-ups, then the national, what about legal fees? How are those handled in each of these resolutions? I know that since these are national, is there a national legal fee fund, or is a portion of the $434 million going to legal fees for the state and locals?
There's a national legal fee fund. It's broken down into a number of different subcategories, but that's in the national settlement documents. And if you have questions, I'm happy to point you to them offline.
Thank you, Jerry.
This is my last one.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Last question, just on the same train. The big one in May, the $500 million against the distributors. How much has the state received its first check? Or I guess it's a double payment. How much did it receive?
Jerry, we've received the legal fees portion of it, and we soon expect to receive, likely next week or in mid-January, the remainder of it. What's happened is the distributors have paid a settlement administrator for the abatement amount, and the settlement administrator is in the process of getting the local governments and the state to sign up for certain things, and then payment's going to go out very soon.
And so maybe just to elaborate a little bit, Jerry, I sort of took out on my talking points. My team provided them, but I took out just because I didn't want my comments going too long. But For each of the 4 resolutions that we're announcing today, the time period in which the entity is going to pay the state varies. If that's not detailed in the press release, I think it is. We're happy to get that for you. But just since you're asking, CVS is paying $110 million over the next 10 years. Walgreens is paying $120 million. I'm using round figures. $120 million over the next 15 years. Teva, $90 million over the next 13 years. Allergan, $50 million over the next 7 years. And Walmart, which we did that deal last week, I believe, if I've got my timing right, they're paying $62.6 million. 97% of that amount is paid in the first year. So each one's a little bit different in terms of when that money comes in. If you want any, we're happy to provide as much. I know you've asked in the past about some of those issues. We're happy to provide the details of that if you're interested. Any other questions from folks on the line?
One more for-
Oh, yes, sorry, go right ahead. Yes,
I'll just
absolutely.
ask you what, you just kind of bigger picture, what is the message you want these resolutions to send to these companies going forward when it comes to their obligations?
Yeah, the message I want to communicate to these companies is twofold. Number one, their conduct caused massive suffering in our state. You know, in pursuit of profits, they ignored the law. These are sophisticated companies. They can hire, you know, excellent lawyers to advise them. They made certain choices. And you travel anywhere in this state and you can see visually the consequences of that action. And, you know, in the privacy of homes, you don't see it, but there's a lot of challenging situations that many, many, many families in our state are grappling with. You are a rare person in the state if you do not have a loved one or a friend or a colleague who has suffered or died because of opioids. And that's just a grim statistic. That's just a fact. That's number one. And number two is we're going to hold them accountable for that. They're going to pay for that. And you know, it's partly why, to your question, it's partly why I don't simply accept every national deal, right? Is that those national deals are good, and I've accepted a number of them. But on their own, I don't think they're enough. I think there is an important value and message in requiring some of these companies to show up in a courtroom and have to testify under oath about the decisions they made and why they made them. And any Washingtonian can walk into that courtroom and watch that. They have to show up for depositions with my legal team and answer very, very detailed questions about their conduct. And look, there is no perfect accountability, obviously, for the harm that was caused. That my team and I, we can't do that. But in talking to many people in this state who have lost loved ones because of the opioid epidemic, you know, one thing I've heard, I've probably said to this podium in the past, is one thing I often hear is that sort of the money is important because they want to prevent the next addiction, right? Or to help someone get off an addiction. And these resources will help save lives. They want that. But they often will say, kind of in the same breath, hey, the money alone is not enough. That I want them to have to defend themselves in a trial. I want that to be public. I want to see the documents. And that stuff only comes out through an actual trial, through an actual lawsuit, where my team can ask for documents, take those depositions, and we show up in a courtroom. And so there is an important value in that as well. So that'd be the second part of the message that I would want to communicate to them as well. Thanks so much for being here. And for those online, Jerry, feel free to follow up if you got questions. I know you have in the past. We're happy to get you that information. And I hope you all have a safe day out there traveling. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, you guys. Yeah, great job. Yeah, really appreciate it. Let's take a picture of what we've got. Ian, I know Ian's here, right?